Got more cool than any 10 actors I've ever seen.
Yes, and speaking of cool.
The sun was low over Carmel, bleeding its last light across the Pacific. The air was still, the kind that hangs around before a storm or a memory. Inside a quiet ranch house, a single lamp burned beside an old leather chair. Clint Eastwood sat there, still as a statue, his fingers drumming slow against a glass of bourbon. 95 years of legend, grit, and silence coiled inside him, yet tonight he looked less like a myth and more like a man trying to remember where it all began. He wasn't one for talking about the past. Never had been. But sometimes in the quiet, when the tide rolled in and the wind sounded like film reels spinning, the memories found him anyway. He'd been called many things: cowboy, outlaw, cop, icon, director. Men had tried to copy his cool, women had tried to understand his silence. But what nobody saw was the cost of carrying a legend on your shoulders for half a century. When the lights fade and the cameras stop rolling, what's left isn't the gunslinger. It's just the man who played him. He leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His eyes, still sharp despite the years, drifted toward the window where the horizon melted into darkness. "Hell," he muttered under his breath, voice low and gravelly. "I've lived a damn long time." He reached for the glass again, but didn't drink. The smell of bourbon, oak, and smoke curled around him like memory. The kind of smell that belonged to dusty saloons, empty film sets, and nights when he'd stood outside under a California sky, wondering if all of it, had meant something. He'd been fearless on screen, sure. But fear doesn't always wear a gun. Sometimes it looks like a quiet room at dusk, when there's no one left to play but yourself. The room around him was a museum of the man he'd been. Framed posters lined the walls, the good, the bad, and the ugly, Dirty Harry, Unforgiven. Each one a chapter of a story too big to live twice. Between them, smaller frames held photographs, some in color, some faded with time. Cast members, directors, old friends, and one picture tucked in the corner almost hidden. A woman smiling, not posed, not aware the camera was watching. His gaze lingered there longer than the rest. A small, private smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, breaking through the granite of his face. Her name didn't need to be spoken. It belonged to a time when the lines between Clint Eastwood and the man beneath him had blurred. When acting wasn't acting anymore, and pretending to love someone for the camera had turned into something dangerously close to truth. He could still see her, standing under the hot-set lights. Her hair pinned back, that look in her eyes sharp enough to cut through every wall he'd built. She wasn't his first leading lady, not by a long shot, but she was the one who made him forget the cameras existed. She had a way of moving, slow, deliberate, like she owned the space around her. When she laughed, it wasn't polite or practiced. It was low, throaty, real. And when she looked at him, it wasn't at the legend. It was through him, straight to the man who didn't quite know what to do with himself when someone saw past the myth. He remembered the first day they met. It was quiet between takes, the kind of quiet that hums with tension. She'd walked up to him, script in hand, eyes unreadable. "You don't talk much, do you?" she said. He'd smiled that lopsided half-grin that drove directors crazy. "Only when I got something worth saying." She'd laughed then, a quick, genuine sound, and he remembered thinking that laugh was trouble. The kind you don't walk away from the same. The movie was supposed to be simple. 2 characters, one love story too restrained for its own good. But the truth was, what happened between scenes was far more complicated. He'd find himself watching her between takes, trying to memorize the way she brushed her hair back, the way she bit her lip when she forgot a line. She had the kind of presence that made you forget there was a crew, that you were being watched, that any of it was pretend. There was one scene, the kitchen scene. Late night, low light, just the 2 of them and the soft buzz of the camera rolling. He had to lift her chin, look into her eyes, pause before the kiss that wasn't written to happen. He'd done hundreds of takes like it before. But that night, something was different. When his hand touched her face, she looked up at him, and for a moment, the whole world disappeared. "No director, no crew, no script. just the pulse in his throat and the quiet dare in her eyes. The camera caught what it could, but the rest, the trembling air, the sharp ache behind his ribs, was his alone. He hadn't kissed her. Not then. Maybe that's what made it worse. After the scene, she'd walked away without a word, leaving him standing there with his heart still hammering like a gunfight echoing after the smoke cleared. He'd laughed it off, made some dry remark to the crew, but inside he knew something had shifted. That kind of connection doesn't fade with the lights. It stays, it lingers. They'd worked together for months, always professional, always careful. But there were moments, quiet, stolen ones, when the distance between them disappeared. A hand brushing against his as they passed scripts. A look that lasted half a second too long. A silence that said more than words ever could. One evening after shooting, the set was empty. The sky was bruised with twilight, and she was standing by her trailer, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. He'd walked up, hands in pockets, unsure why. Maybe he just needed to be near her one more time before reason caught up. "Hell of a day," he'd said, voice low. She smiled, that slow, knowing smile. "Every day's a hell of a day with you, Clint." They didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. He could feel it. The gravity pulling him closer. The danger in wanting something that couldn't belong to him. He'd lived long enough to know that some things were meant to stay just out of reach. Maybe that's what made them beautiful. He remembered that scent. Warm, faint, not perfume, but her. The kind of scent that stayed on your hands long after you'd stopped touching her. He'd breathed it in once, careful, like a man who knew he was standing too close to fire. If he'd breathed deeper, he might have burned the whole set down, the film wrapped. The goodbyes were polite, restrained, as if both of them were pretending they hadn't just spent months circling something dangerous. She hugged him, soft, brief, her voice barely above a whisper when she said, "You're not as tough as you think." He'd smiled. Maybe not. Then she was gone. And just like that, the legend put his armor back on. Years passed. Movies came and went. He built his empire, won his awards, buried his friends. The industry changed. The faces changed. Even the way people looked at him changed. But sometimes, when he was alone, he'd think about that one film, that one woman, and the quiet war he fought to keep from falling apart in front of her. He never called. Never wrote. Maybe that was his way of protecting what they had. Leave it untouched, unspoken. Some memories deserve silence. That's what keeps them alive. Now, sitting in that old leather chair, the ocean whispering beyond the glass, he could still see her face if he closed his eyes. Still feel the ghost of her laughter somewhere between his ribs. Age hadn't dulled that. If anything, it had made it sharper. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes hardening the way they did when he was about to deliver a line that would live forever. "People think I played the tough guy," he murmured, voice breaking just enough to betray the truth. "But the toughest thing I ever did was not say what I felt." The wind outside howled, carrying the faint scent of salt and pine. He sat there listening to it, the sound folding over the years like an old reel spinning back to the beginning. He thought about the moments he'd lived twice, once for the camera, once for himself. The takes nobody ever saw, the glances that never made the edit. He wasn't a man who believed in destiny. Never had. But sometimes when you look back long enough, you start to see the lines you didn't draw. He picked up the photograph again, studying it. Her smile, that easy defiance, the spark in her eyes. He'd spent a lifetime chasing the perfect shot, the perfect take. Funny thing was, that unplanned picture, the one nobody meant to take, was the truest thing he'd ever seen. He set the photo down, exhaled slow. The bourbon glass was still half full, the ice melted. He took a sip, the warmth cutting through the chill that had settled in the room. It tasted like time, bitter, heavy, familiar. Outside, the last light died over the water. The sky turned black, swallowing the horizon whole. Clint sat there in the dark, face half lit by the dying lamp, eyes steady and unblinking. For a man who'd spent his life pretending not to feel, he felt everything now. He thought of all the roles, all the faces, all the stories that made up the legend of Clint Eastwood. Then he thought of her, and how in one quiet moment she'd made him forget he was acting at all. He smiled again, faintly. Guess that's the one scene I never really finished, he whispered. The wind rattled the window. Somewhere outside, the ocean crashed against the rocks, relentless and eternal. He closed his eyes, letting the sound pull him under, slow and steady. The myth could rest for tonight. The man could remember, and for a moment, just one, he wasn't the cowboy, the outlaw, or the icon. He was just Clint, a man who'd looked temptation in the eye and for once in his life didn't pull the trigger. The night was quiet enough to hear the wind drag across the plains. The old house stood at the edge of the land, bones of timber and stone holding decades of stories. Inside, Clint Eastwood sat in the half-light, a glass of whiskey glinting on the table beside him. The ice had melted hours ago, leaving behind a pool of amber warmth he hadn't touched. He stared at the wall where movie posters hung, creases and yellowed corners like old scars. His fingers traced the rim of the glass absently. The silence was heavy, not sad, just full. The kind that comes when a man's lived long enough to run out of lies to tell himself. The only sound was the faint tick of a clock, steady as an old horse's heart. He muttered softly, "Funny thing about getting old. You start remembering the parts you never meant to." The words rolled low, rough, almost swallowed by the air. Outside, the desert stretched endless. He could almost hear the echoes of boots, the calls of long-gone directors yelling, "Action!" like ghosts in the wind. He leaned back, feeling the leather chair creak beneath his weight. 95 years. That's a long time to play the same man in 100 different skins. Cowboy, cop, outlaw, hero, villain. And yet, in every role, he'd only ever been searching for the same damn thing, truth. The weight of time pressed on him like an old saddle. The body slowed first. Knees that once bent to draw a gun now ached when he climbed stairs. Eyes that could read danger from a mile away now strained against the blur of age. But the mind, oh, that was still sharp as barbed wire. And that was its own curse. Memory never rusts. He thought about the old days, when Hollywood wasn't polished, when sets smelled like sweat, coffee, and real smoke. He missed that smell, the grit of it. The kind of work that left dust in your teeth and stories in your blood. He'd lived his life like one of his characters. Quiet, stoic, never giving too much away. But legends have a price. People stop seeing the man and start worshiping the myth. Somewhere along the line, Clint Eastwood became an idea. And sometimes even he wasn't sure who came first, the actor or the gunslinger. The old reels started playing in his mind again. Backlots, sun-baked hills, and camera lights that made the air shimmer. He could still feel the first time someone called him a star. It didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like a warning. Fame was a fire. It could warm you, or it could burn everything you touched. But there was one memory that always burned brighter than the rest. One woman who had walked through his life like a storm, soft, steady, and devastating. He didn't like talking about her. Never did. But in the stillness of that ranch house, with nothing but the hum of old age and regret for company, her memory came uninvited. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed to announce herself. When she walked onto the set, the air just changed. She wasn't loud or flashy, but she carried a quiet fire that drew every eye in the room. Smart, poised, and a little dangerous. They met between takes, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, just two actors trying to make sense of the script and the world. She laughed easily, but there was a sadness under it, like a song played in a minor key. He told himself to keep his distance. He was good at that. Years of discipline, years of pretending emotion was just another tool for the camera. But every time she looked at him, really looked, something cracked. He'd seen beauty before. He'd worked with women who could stop traffic. But she was different. She didn't stop him. She slowed him down, made him listen to the silence between words. They filmed together for months. Long days under brutal sun, long nights under even crueler thoughts. The cameras caught their chemistry, but not their restraint. Between action and cut, there was something real, something unscripted, and they both knew it. There was a scene. They were supposed to hold each other, look into each other's eyes and say lines written by someone else. But when the moment came, the script didn't matter. The world shrank to the sound of her breath and the pulse in his own throat. You can rehearse a fight, he thought, But you can't rehearse the way your pulse jumps when the most beautiful woman in the world looks you dead in the eye. The director called cut, but he didn't hear it. Her hand lingered on his chest a moment too long, and that was enough to haunt him for the rest of his life. After shooting wrapped for the day, he'd saddle his horse and ride out beyond the lights, out where the air was cool and the stars didn't care who you were. He told himself it was to clear his head, but that was a lie. He was trying to outrun something he couldn't name. The sound of crickets filled the night. The saddle leather creaked, and the sky stretched wide and empty. He'd think of her then, the way her hair caught the sun, the quiet way she said his name between scenes, the way she smiled like she knew he was already lost. "The hardest thing I ever did," he whispered once to the wind, "was walk away when I still had the chance to stay." There was one night he couldn't shake from memory. A late scene in the farmhouse set, just the two of them, close enough to feel the heat of each other's skin. The script said they were supposed to almost kiss, but not quite. He remembered her eyes, soft, fierce, impossible to look away from. The crew faded into a blur. It was just them, the hum of the lights, and that unbearable space between almost and too late. He wanted to close the distance. Every part of him screamed for it. But then he saw the faint tremor in her hands, the flicker of emotion she was trying to hide, and he knew if he kissed her, it wouldn't be acting anymore. He broke the moment, stepped back, cleared his throat, and said something about lighting. She smiled just barely. It wasn't relief. It was understanding. That almost kiss became the longest heartbeat of his life. When the movie wrapped, they hugged. Brief, polite, careful. She looked at him, eyes bright but distant, and said, "You were always better at pretending than I was." Then she walked away, heels clicking across the dusty floor, fading into the noise of the crew. He watched her go, knowing he'd never see her again. The car ride home was quiet. He lit a cigarette even though he'd promised to quit. The smoke curled against the window like a ghost he couldn't shake. He didn't think about her for a while, or at least, he told himself he didn't. But years later, she still found her way back into his dreams. Decades passed. The world changed. The films became classics. People called them timeless love stories, said the chemistry was electric. They didn't know it was real. One night, Clint found himself watching that movie again. The sound of the projector whirred low, steady. On screen, there she was, her smile, her voice, the flick of her eyes that could undo a man. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the scene where their hands almost touched. He smiled faintly. "Guess the camera caught more than I thought," he muttered. He could still remember the way she smelled. Something warm, faint, not perfume, just her. And for a moment, he wasn't an old man watching a movie. He was there again, in that farmhouse kitchen, trying not to ruin everything with a single kiss. The years hadn't been unkind, but they hadn't been gentle either. He'd buried friends, outlived legends, and made peace with ghosts. But that woman, her memory, stayed young. She was frozen in that frame, forever 30-something, forever looking at him like she saw past the legend. People talked about legacy, about what it meant to live forever on film. But Clint knew better. Film didn't preserve you. It trapped you. Every smile, every glance, every near miss, it all played on loop, long after the heart behind it stopped beating. He sipped his drink finally, the whiskey burning like old truth. "I've faced down guns, storms, and time itself," he whispered. "But her, she's the one thing I never walked away from." Not really. He stood, slow and steady, and walked out onto the porch. The night was cool. The stars hung low, bright and endless. His horse waited by the fence, patient as ever. He saddled up, breath clouding in the air. The wood creaked, leather strained, and the rhythm of hooves began to beat against the dirt. As he rode into the open, the moonlight washed over the fields. He looked ahead, eyes sharp as ever. The old squint back where it belonged. A man, a legend, and the ghost of a love that never needed to be spoken. The wind carried his voice as he murmured, almost to himself, "They'll remember the gunslinger." But I hope, somewhere out there, someone remembers the man. The sound of the horse faded into the night, swallowed by the vastness of the land. The screen of the mind went dark, just the echo of hooves, a whisper of memory, and the soft hum of a life well lived.